It's great to be at the Hammer at the 4th edition of Made in LA.
I'm Ellegood. I'm the senior curator here at the Hammer.
And I'm Erin Christovale. I'm the assistant curator here at the Hammer.
Can you tell us a little bit about how this all came together, or how does one begin a potentially kind of fraught venture like putting together a regional biennial?
I think what's important with a show like a biennial is this notion that because we can pick anyone, feeling like we wanted to gravitate toward practices that felt really resonant in our moment and were responsive in some ways to the cultural climate that we're all in right now without being particularly topic driven. In other words, we weren't looking for artists to address certain subject matter. We were very open in terms of subject or theme, but we wanted the work to feel like it had some conversation that felt very present and important right now.
So this biennial doesn't have a subtitle or an overarching theme. Was that something that you had decided to do sort of towards the outset of doing the studio visits, or was it something that you came to decide sort of organically after being in the middle of the process?
The heart of the show is Made in LA. So the main intention of the show is to focus on artists that we're interested in, that we think are really innovative right now in the city, or sort of in the outskirts of the city. And so we wanted that to sort of be the core of the show. But as Anne said, I think, certain themes just sort of came to fore, thinking about the political climate at the moment. I think one overarching thing that you'll see is that the body is really present in the show, in the many ways that it's vulnerable, in the many ways that it can become a political site or a place of lived experiences. A lot of the artists, I think, have really sort of looked inwards, and a lot of the work is referencing personal experiences that they've had throughout their life as sort of larger metaphors for what's happening now in the city and in the nation.
Can you tell me a bit about Lauren Halsey's work and how you first came across it?
I've been following her work for many years, and so it's been really special to have her work here. I think what's also really important is that she's someone who was born and raised in Los Angeles, and her work is very much about that, referencing her neighborhood and the community that she grew up in and still lives in.
The version of this project was using the internal architecture that existed by putting these panels along a hallway, and she had been thinking about, since then, something that had an indoor and outdoor, a floor that really was a structure, a full structure. And so Erin and I, before we even invited her to be in the show, we were picturing this here on our Limbrick Terrace. It's just the perfect site for a work like this, because not only can it refer to Egyptian tombs and, of course, her neighborhood in the Crenshaw district, but it can also refer to the very architecture that this museum, has, and more broadly, mid-century modernist architecture in Southern California. So it can really operate on multiple levels for people, and it almost looks as if it's always been here. Sometimes when I see it out of my peripheral vision, if I'm walking across the bridge or something, it just seems like it's part of the actual building.
And also just the weaving together of different modalities, from like the monumental and the vernacular, or the sense of time in terms of references to ancient Egyptian art, but then also these much more contemporaneous logos or names. And it's referring to, something that feels so present, which is, for example, police brutality and, current events in terms of the visibility of this phenomenon.
And I think in speaking to all of the different imagery and the text and the vernacular that you see, Lauren is really interested in thinking about how new mythologies can be constructed, or sort of borrowing from several mythologies to sort of create her own. So a lot of different moments on the structure. One thing that she's referencing, or that she wants to sort of drive at in this work, is thinking about all of the mass development that's currently happening in that area, and what communities of people are sort of in the midst of being displaced, and sort of the vulnerability of their archives.
One of the things I enjoy is you see the profile, but it keeps slipping from view. Can you talk about the images? Are they portraits of people, or what are we looking at?
The columns have always been part of the project, and again, pulled from her archive of different people in the community. Some of them she might know and some she might not, just from taking photographs around the neighborhood. But as you can see, of course, the columns are very colorful, and in a way they're a kind of counterpoint, I think, to the structure in the sense that they feel very vibrant and alive, whereas the structure has a very solemn tone, I think, and as much as it's very much of the moment, it's also a bit of an homage to those who have passed as well.
When she talked about the names in reference to like gun and police violence, something that she spoke of is that, you know, obviously some of these names I think we'll all sort of recognize, but there are other names that are sort of more particular to her neighborhood or friends or family members who have passed away, and she really wanted that space to be this sort of equalizing space for all of those names, you know, in consideration of, I think over the past few years, certain stories or certain deaths have been sensationalized in this way that can be really sticky or contentious, and so really wanting to just draw attention to a group of people who have passed away from this and who continue to pass away from really these sort of violent moments of racism.
Can you talk a little bit about Charles Long, who has been showing in Los Angeles and teaching at UC Riverside for a number of years, and how this installation came about?
I'll just talk about how we sort of thought of Charles in the show. You know, when we were putting together the show, we were really thinking about how important the pedagogy is in Los Angeles in terms of the sort of pinnacle art schools here who have produced amazing artists who have stayed here and who have also become professors and teachers and mentors to, you know, various people in the art community. So we started using this term anchor artists and thinking about artists in this show who have really exemplified that.
The piece that's behind us is the largest piece in the show, and essentially you can see that it's a tree stump, a huge tree stump, made into a sculptural relief. Charles, living on Mount Baldy, noticing how many trees were having to be cut down because of the drought. And because he lives on a mountain, they leave them in the landscape. So there were felled trees, you know, lying around. Looking at the landscape, he started thinking through the relationship between patriarchy and environmental changes that we're seeing. And I think the anger first manifests in him making a lot of drawings where there were penises proliferating everywhere, and realizing that it reminded him of a tree stump. Once you're in here, those references, they're done in such a way that it's not that legible. Most people don't know what they're looking at until we describe it. And there's this feeling of calm, I think, in this space, and a suggestion on his part about, you know, this is an apocalyptic space for him, but one that has a lot of hope still, in terms of what the future might hold.
I think you get that in the way that he uses light, for example, with the Gothic stained glass window reference, and then also the glowing ember.
But the other thing that he does is he revisits seminal artworks by very canonized male artists throughout history and kind of tries to rethink them in his own vernacular, but also thinking about zeroing in on the art world as a kind of male-dominated space too, historically, where women artists and artists of color haven't gotten as much attention or the success that they deserve.
I think he's sort of offering like what's on the other side of the end of patriarchy, you know, some sort of glowing new organic life form or something that we can sort of toy with or experiment with. The stained glass reference for him is really thinking about, you know, certain religions that continue to uphold patriarchy and thinking about what it might mean to dismantle those. I think when we were in our studio visit, we said something like, you know, sort of create the magical fantasy land that you want, and he clearly clearly took that to heart and went for it. You know, I think that that's the power in this room, is that it's actually very playful and inviting, and I think that sort of speaks to a lot of the work in the show, that even though the work can feel deeply political, that there's some sort of hope, or there's sort of like a twofold experience, or, you know, it's open. It's not sort of decided or factual.
Tell tell me a little bit about Nikita Gale's practice and how you came across her work.
So Nikita is someone who thinks about relationships in this really interesting way, and she's really interested in how sort of different technological objects advance us in certain relations or evolve us into certain relationships.
She's thinking a lot about American identity and American history that then, you know, through industry, or in this case, music and rock and roll, become so ingrained in our sense of ourselves.
Also how it's become this genre that has really been sort of like the rebellious genre of all these different musical forms. And so sort of riffing off of the idea of rebellion and revolt, she sort of is tying that back to emphasize that protest is the space or the site that happens on the street. But thinking about how certain musical forms or certain chants are ways in which a collective can build up this action of protest.
I think of this as a huge drawing myself, even though it's quite sculptural. It relies so much on a surface, as you would a piece of paper if you were making a drawing. And the way that Nikita chose to work with scale, once we gave her this space, she began to think about this very large-scale piece, but one that was really connected to the wall, that relied on the wall and relied on having a ground onto which to put all these different elements. And getting back to what Erin was saying about protest and her exploration of protest and music, she was thinking a lot about, you know, different moments in history when protest occurs and revolution, and thinking about the barricade. So these anthropomorphic forms, I think in the way that she set them up, they also become a kind of barricade from you being able to get access to the wall itself. So there's a way in which, you know, you could even argue that the whole installation is a kind of barricade, an accumulation of different objects that sort of keeps something out, potentially. We feel, you know, really excited about the fact that every 2 years, whoever the curators are, it's going to be a completely different show. There are so many great artists. It still feels like we're barely scratching the surface in a way every time we do it, but we feel like it's such an exciting showcase for people to see what's happening in their own city. Because I think that people know that LA has become a real cultural hub and that the visual arts are really strong here, but it doesn't mean you necessarily get to see as much as you might want to. Many artists who live and work here don't have a gallery, they don't have a way to show their work consistently, at least. And so we've been really struck by how over time, I think the show has taken on, you know, it's a little bit better known now, people know it's coming, and I think people who don't necessarily follow the visual arts or even the performing arts or visit museums that often are curious to come and visit the show.
I think in putting together the show, we were really considering sort of the diversity of the city and not necessarily relying on diversity terms in terms of the art world, but really sort of moving forward and thinking about the city as this mass metropolis with all these different cultures and groups of people who have been in various pockets of the city for years, and trying to hone in on a history of LA. I think something that we speak about in the catalog are thinking about some of these seminal figures of Los Angeles like Pio Pico or Biddy Mason, people of color who are really leading sort of the origin story of this city and wanting to consider how those legacies sort of continue.
You know, we have an artist in the exhibition who's Tongva, she's Native American, and her work very directly addresses the history of her people in this city, a history that unfortunately many people don't know much about and haven't been taught adequately and isn't discussed in terms of what contemporary lives might look like for a Native person here. So these are all things that felt really meaningful to us as we were selecting the artists. And in a way, when you go out and do studio visits in LA, these things just start to come forward because of the diversity of the city itself. You know, so many different people live here, and the exhibition can become a bit of a microcosm of that landscape, that cultural and ethnic and racial landscape that we all live in and choose to live in, I think is the other thing that we want to highlight. is that artists want to be here for a reason, and they want to be here in part to be in dialogue with artists of different backgrounds and different experiences.